So this is a video on part 5 of my book, Becoming You. And this chapter is the voice of the inner critic. And there is indeed a voice inside you that speaks before you even ask it to. It tells you that you are not enough. It tells you that you should have known better. It tells you that if you slow down, everyone will see the truth about you. This is the inner critic. And in this part of Becoming You, we're going to meet it properly. Not to silence it, not to fight it, but to understand where it came from and what it is trying to do, and how you can finally change your relationship with your inner critic. And let's start with the big idea. The inner critic is not your enemy. It feels like an enemy because of how harsh it can be. But underneath the harshness is an old and desperate attempt to keep you safe. Somewhere along the way, usually in childhood, you learned that certain things about you were not acceptable. Maybe it was a mistake that brought embarrassment. Maybe it was a moment of big emotion that brought disapproval. Maybe it was simply not being what someone else needed you to be. And so a part of you that formed to prevent that pain from happening again. Now that part became your inner critic. Its job was never to destroy you. Its job was to control you so that you would never again risk the rejection or shame you once felt. This is why the inner critic matters so much, because most of us treat it as a fact rather than a voice. When it says you're not good enough, we don't question it. We simply believe it. We let it set the terms for how much we can want, how much we can try, and how much we can hope for ourselves. The inner critic becomes the quiet architect of a smaller life. It keeps you from putting your hand up. It keeps you from starting the thing you have wanted to start for years. It keeps you apologizing for taking up space that was always yours to take. And because its voice sounds like your own thoughts, you rarely stop to ask whose voice it originally was. So what gets in the way of changing this relationship? Well, the first obstacle is familiarity. The inner critic has often been with you longer than almost anyone else in your life. Its voice is so constant that it can feel like home, even when it is cruel. Now, the second obstacle is fear. Many people worry that if they stop listening to the inner critic, they will become lazy, arrogant, or careless. They mistake the inner critic for the source of their discipline and their standards. And the third obstacle is misplaced loyalty. If the inner critic formed to protect a child from real pain, silence it can feel like abandoning that same protection. So instead of challenging the inner critic, people spend years trying to appease it, hoping that if they just achieve enough or become perfect enough, it will finally go quiet. Well, it never does, because its standards were never really about achievement. They were about safety. Here is a new way of thinking about all of this. In my model, the Filial Psyche, the inner critic is the one of three voices living inside you, alongside the inner child and the inner nurturing parent. The inner child carries your feelings, your needs, and your instincts. The inner critic carries the old rules that were meant to keep those feelings and needs from causing you harm. And the inner nurturing parent is the voice capable of holding both of them with wisdom and compassion. When you only have the child and the critic, you're stuck in an old argument that never resolves. One part wanting, one part warning. The way forward is not to defeat the inner critic. It is to bring in your nurturing parent so that the critic's concerns can finally be heard without being obeyed as law. A good nurturing parent can say, I hear that you're trying to protect us from embarrassment, and thank you for that. And we're also allowed to try this anyway. That single shift from obedience to dialogue changes everything. The inner critic does not need to be crushed. It needs to be answered by someone wiser than the frightened child it was originally trying to protect. Now let's put this into practice. Choose a moment from today when the inner critic spoke up. Write down exactly what it said in its own words then ask yourself a straightforward question. How old does this voice sound? Whose voice does it remind me of? And now write a second response, this time from your developing inner nurturing parent. Not a response that argues or dismisses the inner critic, but one that acknowledges its concern and gently sets a wiser boundary around it. For example, if the inner critic says, you're going to embarrass yourself, the nurturing parent might say, well, it makes sense that you're worried, and we have survived embarrassment before, and we are still going to try. Read both responses out loud. Notice which one feels more like the person you actually want to be. That is the beginning of a new relationship with an important aspect of your own mind. Not one voice ruling silently in the background, but three voices, finally in conversation. My next video will be about the inner child in much more detail.